Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe, and headline number one this week, Democrats are struggling with whether President Joe Biden is capable of completing 4 more years as president by first contemplating if he even has another 4 months worth of disaster-free campaigning left in him to win that presidency again. That, by the way, is, well, I usually start the AZ Political Podcast with 3 headlines, but that is really the only one that matters. The Biden headline is big enough that it's the only one. So what is Plan B for the Dems? Let's take a few minutes to examine what the polls say about how other Democrats would stack up against Donald Trump if Biden decides to take a seat. And joining me is Mike Noble of Noble Predictive Insights, a polling firm here in the Valley, a guy I respect enough that he was not only the very first test subject here on the AZ Political Podcast, he is now the first 2-time guest on the AZ Political Podcast.
I feel like I've made it my life, and I just turned 40 on July 4th. So I mean, again, I feel like I reached my pinnacle.
Well, I'll tell you, be honestly, that's the whole reason we decided to have you again, is because of the whole, born on the 4th of July, always wearing red, white, and blue socks. Yeah, it's pretty awesome stuff.
I'm allowed.
Yeah. So, an Emerson College poll. We talked about this morning on Arizona's Morning News.
Yeah.
The poll shows that Trump leads Biden by 3 points, 46 to 43%, with 11% of voters undecided. Now, when Vice President Kamala Harris is put up against Trump, she also has 43% support, but the percentage of undecided voters drops and puts Trump 6 points ahead of her. Do any Democrats do better than Joe Biden?
Well, in the Emerson poll, no. However, it was interesting. They're a little late to the party because we have, tracker polls in Arizona, Nevada, Utah, but we also have a national tracker poll as well this cycle. And it's interesting. It was probably, 4 or 6 months ago. We actually identified that this trend that everyone seems to be kind of picking up on now, that Biden, better or worse, is kind of the best one available. The only person, frankly, that polls higher, and it was interesting, Emerson didn't have them in the poll, was Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama not only does better than every other Democrat possibility out there, she actually beats Trump by a decent margin.
Really?
Yeah. So, but the thing is, she don't want to run.
That's probably why they didn't put her in the poll.
Well, so there's part of it, but you're looking for, we never say never with certain folks, but yeah, with the current field of people, and that's where I guess people are kind of head scratching of, how come the Democrats aren't looking for a different alternative, especially after that last debate performance, is that they're kind of like, well, he beat him last time and can beat him again. I think they're really gambling, frankly, by doing that. And it's just interesting numbers wise. Yeah, no one else really stacks up. I mean, you look at like Pete Buttigieg to a lot of these other Democrats that are out there. Bernie Sanders, Mr. Gloves. And, for him, for Bert, it just no one really stacks up. And like they're all significantly lower, and they're freaking out because it's like 4 or 4.5 months till Election Day.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The warning signs were there. So David Axelrod, who was, Clinton's general consultant, so his master strategist, right? Mm-hmm. He put an op-ed out as back in, I want to say like January, February of this year. And that's typically what the parties will do if they kind of want to send a signal to the team without like crossing them, is like, hey, you might want to look at this. And he's like, do you guys really sure you want to have Biden be the nominee? Because, he listed out the reasons, like if you're going to make the change, you probably want to do it now, not do it so close to election time. But basically that was dismissed and saying like, again, he beat him before. And I think they also thought because of the indictments, et cetera, like there would be no possible way Trump wins. And it's interesting is that the game of politics, like before the Trump era, yeah, someone with indictments, they'd be dead on arrival.
Right.
But he had a record fundraising number from it, where Biden was leading in fundraising until the indictment verdict came down. Trump now is ahead of Biden, which is crazy because Biden smoked Trump last time in fundraising, had a big significant financial advantage. So, like, again, things are kind of backfiring, and they're, trying to figure out what to do. This
is really interesting because from what I understand, federal election law means that the $240 million in the Biden campaign fund cannot be used on anybody else. except for Biden or Harris. So it kind of almost makes it like she really is the only person that can run, considering that, she's the only person that comes close to what Biden does and wants the office, obviously, right?
Correct. I mean, it's
unlike Michelle Obama.
Correct. And it's only been about a week or so since that performance, and they've been tamping down. You see, what's the choice? So, hey, do we put a convention together or something in 3-4 weeks where we all get together, vet through and come out with united behind one candidate, or do they double, triple down? And it's interesting to see Biden's campaign response of kind of like, hey, everyone, be quiet. I think terms they use were like, bedwetters and things like that, right. Which is interesting because it kind of goes counterintuitive to their platform, especially how they're comparing, contrasting with Trump of like, if he gets elected, it's a dictatorship or whatever, the talking points that they've been using. And it's just interesting to see them going about it. I'm just surprised that they would double down, but also Kamala seems the logical one, but I think you're going to start seeing more pressure come up because especially with the polling showing like she's pretty much there. There's still enough time, and I could see that progressive wing of his party, possibly rebelling a little bit. So, I mean, it's 4 months is an eternity in politics.
Well, so. and I just don't think, I'm not the person who came up with this term, but very often the Democratic Party is referred to as the party of identity politics, right? Could they possibly ever pass over a woman of color to pick someone else? I don't think they can get away with it, considering the left wing of the party would just go nuts.
She's basically the best alternative, which, again, given the scenario, the only question is and it's really up to Biden if he decides if he doesn't want to do it, because the delegates that he's won so far are, legally bound to him, right? So it's really, does Biden make that call? But it seems like he's kind of dug in a bit when, people is pointing out like, hey, I think there might be some issues here. Let's have the conversation. He said, nope, we're good. And if anything, we're going to go on and fight. And so I don't know, it's going to be up to Biden, but I think some pressure. But Kamala seems like the inherent next best choice of who's available.
Right. And she ran a successful Senate campaign in the most populous state in the country, in California. So it's not like she hasn't won a big election before. And it's not like she didn't spend some time in the Senate, right? I think in a lot of ways she makes sense, except for that she is really representing not the hard left, but definitely the left side of the Democratic Party. Well,
and Greg, when we look at like typical campaign fundamentals, right, is that there's certain things you can get around, but like when you get to sometimes age or someone's capacity to do the job, the electorate has a hard stop in that. Like a perfect example, if you look at just here locally in Arizona at the city of Fountain Hills. City of Fountain Hills is heavily Republican, and Joe Arpaio, former sheriff, the most known sheriff in the universe.
Right? Yeah. Not just the U.S., the universe.
The universe, right? It's beyond our planet. And so you look at him, and like for him, he had massive name ID, and again, super Republican area where his base and stuff is. And he went against some no-name candidate, and he had a lot more money and all this other stuff, all these fundamentals, and he ended up losing that election. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's like they like him, but it wasn't enough to end up pulling the trigger for him, because you get to sort of because he's like 93 years old or something. Yeah. And it's like, well, can he do the job? And so I think that's a potential pain point or issue for the Biden campaign. It's going to be hard to get around that.
Right. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned the convention, but in the olden days, and this is before me, I'm not that olden, nominees were actually picked at the convention, but in modern history, they've just kind of become days-long, infomercials. Could that change, though, at next month's Democratic National Convention? I mean, this I certainly could be the most exciting convention since the '68 Democratic Convention, which was also held in Chicago, by the way. I mean, I've heard one person suggest, more than one person actually suggest, that the reason that Biden agreed to do an early first debate is so they could actually vet him, doing a debate before he was the official nominee, so everybody could kind of get a look at him and go, yeah, maybe Biden isn't the guy for us.
Well, yeah, I think that might have been part of it. I think also, too, because it was unprecedented for an incumbent to for president to debate their opponent that early on.
Yeah.
Right. Like we haven't seen that. So why do that? Well, when you look at the numbers, in the 6 key battleground states, Trump is ahead in all 6. He's been ahead in all 6 for the last, 3-4 months or so. And so when you look at it, I think part of the goal too was their strategy, the Biden campaign strategy is like, okay, if we can do a compare and contrast of Trump and Biden, it'd be clear, the guy with the indictments, with the stuff with the porn star, all this stuff, right? And then, Joe Biden. And, that contrast thing is, though, it absolutely backfired. And again, I think they were trying to change the narrative ultimately, because there's questions about his age, his capacity, and all this stuff, and it didn't didn't answer. There's now more questions. So I think it was maybe partially that, but I think it was also really the Biden campaign strategy, and they really dropped the ball.
Yeah. So how does this affect the down ballot candidates, especially here in Arizona?
Historically or now?
Well, let's go back to olden days, as I already mentioned. No, because seriously, like most, congressional, certainly Senate candidates are tied to the top of the ticket, their presidential nominee from their party. Is that a little different this time around?
It's a good point you bring up, is that, Jim, so, all right. So in the 2016 and 2020 election, only 1 out of 59 U.S. Senate races won their race where the person on the presidential ticket lost for their party, right? So basically, like, where goes the president goes the Senate races was kind of thing. Like Ron Brownstein, a national writer, has written a ton about this stuff, and there's just mountains of data to support this, of how closely aligned those two are. That's always been historically the case. However, we're seeing right now, this election, that's about to be flipped upside down on its head. Like, you just look at 3 key battleground states right now: Wisconsin, Nevada, and us here in Arizona. They actually have it where that the Democrat, so Biden is behind Trump in all of those states by like 4 or 5 points, and yet the Democrat for Senate is up by 5 or 6 points. So there's like a 10 or 12 point delta. Remember, they're supposed to be like nose to nose to each other, right?
Right.
But yet there's this massive gap between
and
the
that's
two.
very true for Ruben Gallego. I mentioned this morning, I think it's a 13-point advantage over Biden with Latinos, but there's also a decent advantage over all the voters.
Correct. And it's kind of like what you're seeing in these races is that it's more of a candidate quality problem on the presidential side, because what we know is, and it's the same for Biden and Trump, both of them are under polling where they were. It may be the same names of who's going up against each other this time, but both of them did not get any better really from last time. They both got worse, just one's doing worser than the other. And so when you're looking at that, is that these other Democrats are kind of getting treated more like generic Democrats and kind of branding, and they're making their own way, where Biden's got some significant liabilities that have been brought up. Like look in the last week or so, ever since the coverage of the debate, what's the whole conversation been about? Has it been about abortion rights? Has it been about climate change or any of this stuff? It's like, no, they've been questioning the fitness for office or whatever. So it's been tough for them, but basically Democrats are getting treated more like generically over there, and they're able to kind of separate themselves, because voters, much as you want to say, especially nowadays where folks have a lot more information, they can get their stuff, like they make choices. Like a lot of people are like, oh, they're just going to vote down ticket one way, and they're like, no, I like this person because of XYZ, but I'm going to go with this person, or they may default more to party lines. So like, it's just the game of politics. There's been 7 times we've had a big restructuring since we became a country, and we're now heading into the 8th time, because like right now we're witnessing, if you believe national and regional polling, is that we're witnessing one of the biggest demographic shifts between the two respective parties, like the coalition shift, since the civil rights movement in the 60s. It was the last time this happened. So like 8 decades ago, roughly, or 6 decades?
Six decades, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I was born in 84. Give me a break. And so, but we look at this shift, right? Like where, like, for example, African Americans, 9 in 10 would vote for Democrats, right? Granted, they're only 11% of the total vote nationally, but when you're getting 9 in 10 of them, it's a ton. But you're seeing degradation there, where they're ideologically sorting where like African Americans would just be with the Democrats. The conservative African Americans are moving over to Trump, and you're seeing that with Latinos. Also, you're seeing with younger voters and middle-aged voters. So you're seeing this big realignment happen between the two parties that was something we haven't seen. So the game is frankly being rewritten as we speak, and that goes for these Senate races as well.
So you get hired to do polling for some campaigns.
Polling, focus groups.
Yeah, right. So if you were running a poll for the Democrats, and based on everything you've seen about all the different polls nationally around the country, would your suggestion to the Democratic National Party be it's got to be Joe Biden or you're going to lose? Even if you lose either way, you're definitely going to lose if you run somebody else.
I think that if I was advising them, which I'm a nonpartisan, so I don't take argument races. However, hypothetically, if I were, I would strongly urge them to hold a convention in 3 or 4 weeks from now where they get in a room for 3-4 days, vet through the candidates, and come out unified behind one, because I see a couple things happening. One, I don't think the parties be unified. And also, they're struggling with the younger wing of their base, of that 18 to 34 crowd, which they've been usually pretty strong with. Because, again, how do they identify with someone who's, 80-something years
81,
old,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like, so I think there's issues there. I just think they're really gambling, frankly, with Biden there when there's frankly other choices, and I see the conundrum.
But there aren't. It doesn't seem like there's really any other choices though.
There are, like Kamala. Okay, so she's 2 points slightly better, right? That's as of today, but she's also the VP. Like she hasn't been able to go out there and start campaigning, right? So, for example, back in May of 2020. There was a 7-point gap between where the polling was to what the final result was. So there was like a 7-point swing in the race from May till whatever there, which a lot of people had opinions on already. But like, so it's kind of volatile, right? And so remember, polling is a snapshot in time, and it's that. You either run out of fear or you kind of run on your principles and your platform, and that's where. I think the Biden stuff, I've just been really surprised with their response of like, hey guys, just shut it and get on board. Even though, and not having the discussion, which I think is a warranted discussion. So
your advice would not be stick with Joe Biden because he's your best chance. You got to see who else is out there to see if you've got a chance with anybody else.
Well, the party needs to be unified. And I think it's clear it's not, because when you're having to strong arm your own party to get them in line, and the Democrats' strength is their broad coalition and their unity. If they're not united, they're not a strong party. Compared to the Republicans. The Republicans aren't as big of a coalition, but they're a little more unified and more potent when they do it. So, like, they need to have everybody on board.
But is it true that the main person they have to have on board is Joe Biden? I mean, they can't drag him off the stage kicking and screaming. That won't look good either, will it?
And that's why also, too, Biden has to say he's not running as well, because I'd see it's tough the way the delegates and how the conventions are basically set up. Is when Obama took office, he kind of took a sledgehammer to the Democratic convention process and basically archetyped it where it really favored the incumbent. And that's the problem, is that he has to make that decision. But again, that's why, but they're not even having the conversation about it, which I think is, for a party that's very open, that represents the people, et cetera, I just think they're heading in a direction that I think will cause them a lot of pain later on down the road.
I'm going to ask you one last question, and this is a personal.
Who's going to win the election?
No. This is because we don't even know who's going to run at this point, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah. So no, this is a personal question. Do you take offense when people come up to you, because you're a pollster, you provide news content. I work in the news business. Do you get offended when people say, man, this must be great for your business, you must just be loving this? And I say, no, I'm an American first. I don't want our country to be in turmoil. I don't want to have our state in turmoil. I want things to be sane and normal and all that. I'd be happy to just have boring news.
It's an interesting question, Jim, because
it is crazy times we live in, though.
Well, so from my perspective, perspective, I see, and I remember back in the day, I was a partisan, I was a campaign consultant, all that. But I've been nonpartisan for a bit now, and it's been very enlightening because, again, our biases and what we've seen, the data greatly shows it. Like just a decade or so ago, when you asked a Republican or Democrat what their view was of the other team, only like 2 in 10 had a very unfavorable opinion. Like, I hate that team, right?
Yeah.
And then now it's 6 in 10.
Wow.
For both sides. It's almost like both are treating each other like good versus evil, depending on who you're talking to, and everything's so visceral. And I think a lot of folks are losing sight of the ultimate purpose is that, okay, there's two parties, but okay, you have your positions. It's not an all or nothing game. It's not zero sum.
Right.
Ideally, you're here, I'm here. Let's find a place in the middle, a little trade-off, right? And that's probably what works for everybody, right? And I think that is the thing that scares me a little bit the most is like, polling and stuff. Like polling, what is it? It's the public's opinion. You can go out and ask every single person's opinion out there, right? Which is not really feasible and costs a fortune. Or you do the voodoo that we do, and we can do it with a very high degree of accuracy and tell you what people's sentiment is on any given topic or issue. So I think we're heading to is that people have gotten so partisan, right? And not looking at kind of the greater picture of what's best for the country compared to what red team versus blue team.
Well, and to me, the biggest thing that bothers me about this partisanship is instead of saying, that person has got the wrong ideas, it's going to hurt the country if that person gets elected. They say instead, that person is out to hurt this country. They hate America. That's why they have these policies. When the truth is, right or wrong, even if those policies are bad for the country, those people believe in those policies because they think it's the best thing for people.
Well, correct. And it's funny that I think that people, you just look at the culture of politics, like before other sides of the aisle could go, like people going to have knockdown, drag out fights on the Senate floor and then go have a drink with them afterwards or hang out with their families.
Yep.
Now you can't even be caught in public talking to the other team. Yeah. Otherwise you get ostracized because again, it's this zero-sum game between the two. And so there's really no incentive for being collegial or anything else, and people are just getting more dug in on their sides, which I think is a shame because I think there's a lot when we are united, there's nothing we can't do, but divided. And all the greatest empires or countries in the world, if you look at history, they've never been taken out by outside forces. They've always been taken out from within. So it's just, I think we'll have a reset here soon, and but faith will come out better and stronger.
I hope so. I hope so for your boys.
Yeah,
and keep wearing those socks. Those aren't Democrat or Republican socks right there.
Nope. America.
Those are America socks.
Right. And we've had Democrats, Republicans all through the history of America that have made all these policies, etc. And so again, not one side or the other is better than the other. And again, it's just having the policy and the debate, but also not
hating each other.
Yeah, it's just that's where it's gone down to, and it's like less hate and just like let's focus on the substance and also the greater task.
That's why I'm so glad you're my first two-time guest ever on the AZ Political Podcast. That's Mike Noble from Noble Predictive Insights. I'm Jim Sharpe. Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.